wrote the first book on the Salem Witch Trials, and when? The answer may surprise you. The Salem Witch Trials are one of the most written about historical episodes ever. Books abound on the topic, which supplies an endless amount of ideas to writers. Did you know that even right from the very beginning of the witch panic, people just couldn't wait to write about it? And that people continued to write about the witch trials despite a colony-wide ban on publication? Hi, this is The Thing About Salem, and I'm Josh Hutchinson.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jack. Today we examine the many early writings about the Salem Witch Trials, those published during the event, and those printed in the first decade after.
2 months before the witch trials even began, former Salem Village Minister Deodat Lawson documented a trip he made to the village in the spring of 1692. His account and a sermon he gave there were both published within 2 weeks of his visit.
People really wanted to know what was happening in Salem Village. They couldn't wait to read the latest gossip.
With fewer forms of entertainment available, the people were starved for a good witch story. Had there been a newspaper, the press would have been going around the clock.
So, Reverend Lawson had been minister in Salem Village from 1684 to 1688.
And evidently, Lawson still had friends in town because he was invited up from Boston to give a lecture in Salem Village on Thursday, March 24th, 1692.
According to his first-hand paparazzi account, he arrived in the village on the 19th, a Saturday, and remained until at least March 24th. Beyond that, he included accounts he received from others after his departure, up until an entry misstated April 3rd, summarizing a sermon Samuel Parris actually gave on March 27th, the sermon that Sarah Cloyce walked out of mad.
Lawson concluded his account with some observations of the afflicted and the accused.
The printer added a bookseller's note to the reader, quote, "The bookseller to the reader, the ensuing narrative being a collection of some remarkables in an affair now upon the stage, made by a credible eyewitness, is now offered unto the reader only as a taste of more that may follow in God's time.
If the prayers of good people may obtain this favor of God, that the mysterious assaults from hell, now made upon so many of our friends, may be thoroughly detected and defeated, we suppose the curious will be entertained with as rare an history as perhaps an age has had, whereof this narrative is but a forerunner." Benjamin Harris.
Wow.
So they're really getting into the salaciousness, the whole sensationalism about this. He's like, this is going to be so entertaining as our friends and neighbors get killed. It's going to entertain everybody.
So it's not just
It's
modern
weird.
pop culture that has sensationalized Salem.
No, right. This is, remember, the trials don't start until June. And this is April 5th that this thing goes to press. And they're ready. They're ready for anything that happens. They want to be entertained.
Here we go.
But Lawson is crucial because he gives us the eyewitness perspective. He arrived in Salem Village in March 1692, right when things were heating up. His narrative chronicles what he saw and what others saw between March 19th and April 5th. And Sarah, the details are visceral.
They are terrified observations. Lawson describes seeing Mary Walcott and Abigail Williams in violent fits. He didn't just see them screaming, he saw physical evidence. He writes about seeing visible teeth prints on their arms from invisible biters.
And the psychological pressure in the meeting house, the church, was immense. Lawson describes the afflicted interrupting worship services. They would yell out at respected community members. He specifically mentions Abigail Williams yelling at him and claiming to see Goodwife Corey suckling a yellow bird on her fingers.
Imagine the chaos of this moment. And Lawson validated the sympathetic magic that became so deadly in court. He noted that during examinations, if the accused bit their lip or clenched their hands, the afflicted accusers would instantly cry out in pain. He even documented the tragedy of Sarah Good's 4-year-old child, Dorothy, who was jailed after confessing her mother gave her a snake to suckle.
Lawson's account ends with the conclusion that this was a satanic attempt to mimic and divide Christ's kingdom. He essentially told the colony, "This is real. The war is on."
I'm just thinking about when this came out, who hadn't been accused yet. They were caught up in it themselves in the excitement, but they hadn't found themselves on the wrong side yet.
Yeah, they might have read this about what was going on in their community, but they hadn't received any, they hadn't been named, so they didn't know it was going to affect them personally.
Our own ancestors.
Our own ancestors, yes.
Almost immediately, there was pushback. It wasn't loud at first, but it was there. We see it in a document by Samuel Willard from later in 1692, known as Some Miscellany Observations on Our Present Debates in a Dialogue Between S and B. It's written as a conversation between two characters, S representing the Salem prosecution and B representing the skeptical view.
This document is fascinating because it's so logical. They both agree, S and B, that witches exist. That wasn't the debate that was happening at the time. The debate was about proving that somebody had committed acts of witchcraft. S argues that strong presumption is enough to catch a witch because it's a hidden crime. But B argues that you need humane evidence, facts you can see and hear with natural senses, not supernatural guesses.
B specifically questions the touch test, the idea that a witch's touch cures the victim's fit. S says it never fails, but B argues that relying on that is relying on the devil's information. If the devil is doing the tormenting, why are we trusting him to tell us who the witch is?
That question, why are we trusting the devil, became the wedge that eventually cracked the trials open. But before the trials ended, 3 heavyweights entered the ring in October 1692. Thomas Brattle, Increase Mather, and Cotton Mather, and they represent very different views of the crisis.
Let's start with Brattle. His letter is scathing. He doesn't hold back. He condemns the touch test as nothing more than sorcery and, quote, Salem superstition. He mocks the judges for thinking they can catch a witch by pistoling the shadow, meaning convicting someone based on what their specter does.
Brattle also shines a light on the hypocrisy of the court. He notes that distributive justice failed because people connected to the judges, like Mrs. Thatcher, were accused but never arrested. And he talks about violent, distracting, and dragooning methods used to force confessions.
I think that's so interesting that this early it was being noted which types of people accusations were falling on and believed to be true.
Yeah, and people recognize that a lot of the elite people are getting off.
While Brattle was shouting, "Stop," Cotton Mather was shouting, "Fight." His book, The Wonders of the Invisible World, was commissioned by the governor to defend the trials.
Mather paints a picture of a spiritual siege. He argues the devil has come down with great wrath because he knows his time is short. He details the physical evidence, the teeth marks, the poppets found in Bridget Bishop's walls with headless pins in them.
He also tries to justify the executions. He lists the preternatural strength of George Burroughs and the confession of Martha Carrier's children. To Mather, these weren't mistakes, they were battles won in a holy war.
But Cotton Mather's defense couldn't stand against his own father's logic. Increase Mather wrote Cases of Conscience at the same time, and this is really the document that stopped the machinery of death.
It comes down to that one theological point. Can the devil frame an innocent person? Increase Mather said, yes. He asserted that Satan can certainly transform into an angel of light. Therefore, seeing a ghost of your neighbor doing harm isn't proof that it's your neighbor doing the harm.
Increase famously wrote that it is better for 10 suspected witches to escape than for one innocent person to be condemned. He demanded that evidence for witchcraft be as clear as evidence for murder. No more swimming the witch and no more touch tests.
Once Increase Mather changed the standard of evidence, the trials effectively collapsed. But the story doesn't end there. Then came the regret and anger.
5 years later, in 1697, Reverend John Hale wrote a modest inquiry into the nature of witchcraft. Hale had been there at the witch trials from the start. He had supported the trials. He'd even testified against someone, Dorcas Hoare, in the trials. But now, looking back, he admits the trials were misguided zeal.
It's a humble admission that he's made. He says they walked in clouds and darkness. He systematically dismantles the very evidence he once accepted, the witch marks, the touch tests. He admits those evidences were likely delusions of Satan intended to ensnare the innocent.
If Hale was the apology, Robert Califf was the indictment. In 1700, Califf published more Wonders of the Invisible World, and he went directly after Cotton Mather.
Robert Califf was furious. He attacked the theology that gave the devil so much power. He argued that claiming the devil can perform miracles or independent harm is blasphemous because those powers belong to God.
Califf also provided the historical receipts. He documented the recantations of the confessors who admitted that they had lied to save their lives. He published the apology of the jurors who admitted they were under a strong and general delusion. He made sure the heathenish methods of the court were recorded for history.
We also have to mention Thomas Mowell, who published Truth Held Forth and Maintained in 1695. Mowell was a Quaker, and he had a completely different take on why this happened.
Mall didn't see it as a satanic plot against the church. He saw the trials as divine judgment against New England for the sin of blood, specifically the persecution of Quakers.
Isn't that a powerful twist? Mall argues that the persecuting priests and rulers were the real witches because they were in rebellion against God. He pointed out the cynicism of the court, how the arrest stopped only when the specter started accusing eminent persons instead of the poor.
Mall's conclusion is it is better that 100 witches should live than that one person be put to death for a witch, which is not a witch.
So we go from Lawson seeing teeth marks and terrifying beasts to Mall and Califf seeing a government that lost its way and shed innocent blood.
These documents are the Salem Witch Trials. They are the evidence of how fear can hijack a system and how difficult but necessary it is to walk that back. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the books that tell us the story of the Salem Witch Trials.
They're there. You can read them too. Join us each and every day for Salem Witch Trials Daily. And again next week for another The Thing About Salem when we talk about the Salem Witch Trial judges.
I wonder how many trees were cut down for paper to write about the Salem Witch Trials, and how much ink was used.